So welcome to the next chapter. It is gaseous exchange in animals. Animals require oxygen for respiration, which is an energy generating process essential for growth, movement, reproduction and transport. During respiration, carbon dioxide is liberated. A continuous system of exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen is therefore paramount in all animals. Exchange of these gases occur across moist surfaces by diffusion across a concentration gradient. Unicellular organisms and small animals can exchange gases directly across their body surfaces by simple diffusion. Why? Because they have a large surface area to volume ratio. Large animals, on the other hand, have a small surface area to volume ratio. Most of the cells are located deep inside the body. The transport system is important to bring the oxygen molecules close enough to the cells for diffusion to occur. Carbon dioxide is also released and transported to respiratory surfaces where it is expelled outside the body. Characteristics of gaseous exchange surfaces. Now, gaseous exchange surfaces have thin membranes to reduce the distance across which gases diffuse. Such structures include gills and the alveoli. They also highly folded or branched surfaces to increase the surface area for rapid exchange of gases. The surfaces have moisturized linings to enable gases to dissolve before diffusing. They also have a dense network of capillaries beneath the surface which deliver the exchange gases to and from the exchange surfaces. The mechanisms of gaseous exchange differ from simple to complex animals. Gaseous exchange in unicellular organisms. The amoeba, being single-celled, carries out gaseous exchange across its cell membrane by simple diffusion. Oxygen, which is highly concentrated in the environment than inside the body of the amoeba, diffuses across the cell membrane. The oxygen is used for respiration, releasing carbon dioxide, which accumulates inside the cell. When carbon dioxide concentration is higher inside the cell than outside, the carbon dioxide diffuses out into the atmosphere. In order to facilitate rapid gaseous exchange, the surrounding medium should and must be moist. Gaseous exchange in arthropods. Insects. Gaseous exchange in insects is via structures called spiracles, thoracic and the abdominal segments. The spiracles have muscular valves which control their opening and closing. The hairs found on them reduces water loss and entry of dust particles and other foreign materials. Each segment has a pair of spiracles, each on either side. The spiracles open into the trachea, which have rings of chitin which keeps them open and prevents collapsing. There are two tracheae, one running along each side of the body. The trachea open into tracheoles, which are in direct contact with the body tissues and are kept moist by a fluid. The spiracles, trachea and the tracheoles make up the tracheal system. There are thin-walled air sacs along the trachea that act as air reservoirs. During inhalation, oxygen flows in from the atmosphere where it is highly concentrated. During this phase, the abdominal muscles relax and the spiracles valves open. Tracheoles are dilated and air flows in. The air moves through the trachea into the tracheoles, and this leads to a higher concentration of oxygen in the tracheoles than in the cells. Oxygen thus diffuses across the moist membrane of the tracheoles and into the tissues. This oxygen is used in respiration and carbon dioxide is produced. Exhalation. After respiration, carbon dioxide concentration is higher in the tissues than in the tracheoles. It thus diffuses out into the tracheoles. The abdominal muscles contract. Air pressure is created in the tracheoles, expelling the carbon dioxide. Now air enters through the anterior spiracles and leaves the tracheal system through the posterior spiracles. Air current is created along the body, causing abdominal pulsations. Well, next is gaseous exchange in fish. A bony fish like tilapia lives in water. It obtains oxygen and releases carbon dioxide to the same water. The structures of gaseous exchange in fish include the mouth, gills, gill chamber, operculum, and the opercular opening. The operculum is a bony structure that covers the gills from outside. The gill chamber contains gills, 4 on either side of the head of the fish. On the inner side of the gills is the pharynx. Water flows from the mouth to the buccal cavity, the pharynx, gill chamber, and out through the opercular opening. The gills contain a curved bony gill bar that supports the gill filaments. These filaments are membranous projections which provide a large surface area for gaseous exchange. They also have a dense network of capillaries beneath them which deliver carbon dioxide and take up oxygen. Mechanism of gaseous exchange in fish. Inhalation. During this phase, the floor of the mouth opens, the volume increases and pressure decreases. Water enters the mouth into the buccal cavity. The operculum bulges outwards, creating low pressure in the gill chamber. This sucks water from the mouth cavity into the gill chamber and over the gill filaments. Water flows through the gills in the opposite direction to the flow of blood in the capillaries, an arrangement called countercurrent flow. Countercurrent flow ensures maximum extraction of oxygen from the water into the blood. Meanwhile, the operculum remains closed. Water in the gill chamber has a higher oxygen concentration than the gill capillaries. Oxygen diffuses into the capillaries as a consequence. It combines with hemoglobin to form oxyhemoglobin and is transported to all parts of the body. Oxygen is used in respiration, a process that releases carbon dioxide. Now, carbon dioxide concentration is higher in the blood than in the water, and carbon dioxide thus diffuses out into the water in the gill chamber. Exhalation. During exhalation, the floor of the mouth is raised, volume is reduced, and pressure is increased. This forces water into the gill chamber. Pressure in the gill chamber increases, forcing the operculum to open and release the water. Now, water flows over the gill filaments almost continuously. Meanwhile, during inhalation and exhalation, the opening of the esophagus remains closed so that water doesn't enter. Next, gaseous exchange in mammals, and we look at humans. Now, the structures for gaseous exchange in humans include the following: the nasal cavity, trachea, lungs, ribs, the vertebral column, sternum, intercostal muscles, and the diaphragm. We look at each one of them in that order, and we start with the nasal cavity. The nostril lets air in and out of the body. The nostril leads to the nasal cavity, which is lined with mucus and hairs. Now this filters and traps dust particles and microorganisms in the air. The air is also warmed and moisturized in the nasal cavity. It is then passed to the pharynx, a space in the posterior end of the buccal cavity and the nasal cavity, and into the trachea. The trachea. Air moves into the trachea through a small opening called the glottis. It has a flap called the epiglottis, which closes when swallowing to prevent entry of food particles into the trachea. Choking and coughing are reflex actions that remove foreign particles from the trachea. The trachea is made up of incomplete rings of cartilage which keep it open and prevent collapse. The incomplete rings allow for smooth swallowing in the esophagus. The inner lining secretes mucus to trap and filter microorganisms and dust particles. The trachea has also cilia which beat to move the mucus upwards to the pharynx. The trachea branches into bronchi. They are narrower than trachea and have complete rings of cartilage. Each bronchus enters a lung and extensively branches into bronchioles. Bronchioles have no rings of cartilage and each ends up in a tiny air sac called the alveolus. Gaseous exchange takes place here. The alveolus are supplied with a dense network of capillaries to provide large surface area for gaseous exchange. Lungs. There are two lungs on either side of the chest cavity. The space where lungs are contained is called the pleural cavity. Each lung is enclosed by membranes called the pleural membrane. The pleural cavity contains the pleural fluid secreted by the pleural membrane. This provides lubrication when membranes slide over each other during breathing movements. Ribs. The thoracic cavity is surrounded by ribs, sternum, and the vertebrae. The ribs project from the vertebral column dorsally and ventrally with the sternum. The lower ribs are, however, not attached to the sternum. The ribs protect the lungs and the heart. Intercostal muscles. Intercostal muscles are found between the ribs. There are internal and external intercostal muscles and they work antagonistic to each other. That is, when one relaxes, the other contracts. Diaphragm. The thorax is airtight and enclosed by ribs and the diaphragm. The diaphragm is dome-shaped when at rest. It is a muscular sheet of tissue extending across the body cavity between the thorax and the abdomen. Next, we look at the mechanism of breathing in humans, and we start with breathing in. Now, when breathing in, the external intercostal muscles contract while the internal intercostal muscles relax. The rib cage is lifted upwards and outwards. The diaphragm flattens as a result of the contraction of its muscles. The volume of the thoracic cavity increases while pressure decreases. Air pressure in the atmosphere is higher than the pressure in the thoracic cavity, and air moves into the lungs through the nostril. Exhalation or breathing out. During exhalation or breathing out, the external intercostal muscles relax this time and the internal intercostal muscles contract. The ribcage moves downwards and inwards. The diaphragm returns to its dome shape as a result of relaxation of its muscles. The sternum moves inwards and the volume of the thoracic cavity decreases while pressure increases. Air pressure in the thoracic cavity is higher than that in the atmosphere, and air moves out of the lungs through the nostril into the atmosphere. Exchange of gases in the alveoli. Now, gaseous exchange occurs in the alveoli. Now, the gases exchanged are of course the respiratory gases, carbon dioxide and oxygen, and the gaseous exchange depends on the concentration of each of these gases in the inhaled and exhaled air. When there is a high concentration of oxygen in the air spaces of the alveoli than in the blood, oxygen diffuses across the membrane of the alveoli and capillaries and into the bloodstream in the capillaries. The oxygen combines with hemoglobin to form oxyhemoglobin. Some oxygen also dissolves in the plasma. The oxygen is transported to the tissues and organs of the body. Oxyhemoglobin releases oxygen to the tissues which use it during respiration, and carbon dioxide is released. Now, when the tissues have a higher concentration of carbon dioxide than the blood in the capillaries, the carbon dioxide diffuses from the tissue cells across the membranes of the capillaries into the blood. Some carbon dioxide dissolves in the plasma as well to form carbonic acid, and some of the gas combines with hemoglobin to form carbinohemoglobin. Carbon dioxide diffuses across the membranes of the capillaries and alveoli into the alveolar space. The gas is then released from the alveolar space through the nostril as a person is breathing out. So how then are the alveoli adapted for gaseous exchange? First, there are numerous alveoli to provide a large surface area for gaseous exchange. The human being has about 600 million alveoli. The alveoli have a thin membrane which reduces the distance through which gases diffuse. The alveoli also have a moist surface which enables gases to dissolve into solution before diffusing. The alveoli are also supplied with a dense network of capillaries to transport gases to and fro tissues of the body. Finally, the alveoli are also supplied with air through the bronchioles that are linked to the trachea. Control of breathing. Now, the average breathing rate in human beings is around 16 to 18 times per minute. The breathing is controlled by part of the brain called the medulla oblongata. The concentration of carbon dioxide in the blood determines the breathing rate. When there is a high concentration of carbon dioxide in blood flowing through the medulla oblongata, nerve impulses are sent to the breathing structures, leading to an increased rate of breathing. The rate of breathing increases in order to supply enough oxygen and also remove the excess carbon dioxide. Increase in the rate of breathing increases oxygen supply to the body tissues. When there is low carbon dioxide concentration in the blood reaching the medulla oblongata, the normal rate of breathing is restored. But there are factors that affect the rate of breathing, and they include the following. Age. Young people generally breathe faster than old people. Why? Because young people are actively growing, and hence the faster rate of breathing to supply tissues with oxygen, which are rapidly metabolizing and growing. The oxygen is utilized in respiration, and the energy produced is used for growth and carrying out physical activity. Another factor is physical activities themselves. Now, vigorous activities such as running or sports activities increase the rate of breathing. The faster rate of breathing supplies oxygen to tissues for respiration and also rapidly removes the carbon dioxide to prevent accumulation. Next, health. During sickness, the rate of breathing increases. The faster rate of breathing enables the liver to remove toxins in drugs and those released by disease-causing microorganisms. The faster rate of breathing also enables the kidneys to excrete waste products from the body metabolism through the urine. Altitude. At high altitude, the rate of breathing is faster than at low altitude. Why? Because at high altitude, oxygen concentration is low, and thus the faster rate of breathing helps to supply tissues with sufficient oxygen in that scenario of inadequacy. Finally, we look at respiratory diseases, and respiratory diseases affect organs used in gaseous exchange. Now, they lead to inefficient supply of oxygen and removal of carbon dioxide from the body tissue. These diseases include bronchitis, pneumonia, tuberculosis, asthma, whooping cough, lung cancer, influenza, and so many others. Bronchitis results from the membranes lining the air passage becoming inflamed. This is caused by many types of bacteria, viruses, and inhaled irritants. Bronchitis is actually a result of the reaction of the body to foreign substances. The common types of bronchitis are acute and chronic. Acute bronchitis is caused by the constant attack of influenza and whooping cough. Chilling of the body makes one susceptible to bacterial infections. The symptoms of acute bronchitis include coughing, headaches, fever, pain beneath the sternum, and breathing fast. Acute bronchitis can be prevented by keeping warm, and whenever symptoms appear, one is advised to seek prompt treatment for infections of any respiratory system. Chronic bronchitis, on the other hand, results from heavy cigarette smoking and constant attacks by acute bronchitis. The symptoms include production of thick sputum and difficulties in breathing. It can be controlled by avoiding smoking or smoky places and continuous exposure to dusty places. One is also advised to keep warm and live in well-ventilated places. Whenever symptoms appear, seek medical attention immediately. The other disease is pneumonia, and pneumonia is a disease caused by the bacterium pneumococcus. The chances of attack are increased by other chest infections, for example bronchitis and whooping cough. The symptoms of pneumonia include shallow and difficult breathing, coughing with the production of sputum, fever and chest pains. The lungs may also become inflamed and the alveoli are filled with fluid. The disease can be prevented by avoiding overcrowded and poorly ventilated places. It is treated using antibiotics that must be prescribed by a physician or a doctor. Tuberculosis, commonly called TB. TB is caused by the bacterium Mycobacterium tuberculosis. The bacterium is a bacillus. This disease affects any part of the body. It can affect the bone and the lymphatic nodes. It is spread through saliva droplets, sputum, and infected milk. The symptoms include fever and fatigue, deep coughing, congestion of the lungs leading to production of sputum with blood, and loss of body mass. Control and treatment. Suspected sufferers should have a medical checkup. Avoiding overcrowded and dirty places is also a precautionary measure. Early immunization and a well-balanced diet, and it can be treated using antibiotics, again prescribed by a physician. Asthma. Asthma is a disease of the respiratory system which mainly affects the air passageways. The causes of asthma include the following: allergy, which can be due to pollen grains, dust, spores, and fur of animals. An allergy, we've said before, is an overreaction of the body to a harmless foreign particle. The body reacts by producing antibodies against the foreign particle. It can also be caused by constant lung infection caused by viruses and bacteria. Emotional and mental stress such as anxiety, anger, and fear also predispose one to asthma. Asthma can also be caused by certain hereditary diseases, especially those affecting the respiratory organs. Mild or extreme cold weather can also lead to development of asthma. Symptoms of asthma: narrowing of bronchioles which causes blockages, difficulty in breathing and production of hissing or wheezing sound, overproduction of mucus, dilation of blood vessels causing low blood pressure which could lead to death. Control: one can control asthma by avoiding agents that cause the disease such as dust, pollen grains, and fur. Administration of drugs, pills, injections, and spraying of muscle relaxants into the nasal cavities. Early treatment of other respiratory diseases is also a precautionary measure against asthma. Finally, whooping cough. Whooping cough, also called pertussis, results from acute infection of the respiratory tract by the bacterium Bordetella pertussis. The disease is endemic in Kenya. An endemic disease is one which is regularly found in specific group of people. The symptoms of whooping cough include prolonged coughing and vomiting, bleeding of the eyes, convulsions and coma, ulcers and cardiac failure, malnutrition, especially protein and calorie deficiency due to repeated vomiting and difficulty in eating. Control of whooping cough: patients with complications should be admitted to hospital for special care and treatment. Patients should be fed well during the time of sickness, and immunization should be given soon after birth to curb against whooping cough.
High blood pressure is an indication of hypertension, and hypertension places people at higher risk for things like heart attacks, strokes, and kidney and heart failure, all potentially fatal conditions.
There are several factors that affect blood pressure. The first is cardiac output, the volume of blood that is being pumped. When cardiac output rises, blood pressure rises. A second factor is blood volume. If an individual begins losing blood, for example due to a major injury, blood pressure will fall.
Loss of pressure can mean insufficient blood flow and a lack of oxygen to the tissues, which can cause permanent damage, even death. It's very important to restore blood volume and blood pressure as soon as possible to provide oxygen to these tissues.